We interrupt this program to bring you this special bulletin. We've received reports of not one but two disturbing developments in the flash fiction horror scene. We have it on good authority that space worms have already invaded and are out there looking for the man. And a new trend to commemorate the happiest day of your life has experts worried. We go now to our correspondents, Sasha Brown and Timaeus Bloom, for the full story.
Outside the park and across the street spun a giant holographic head. You can guarantee your story has a happy ending, sang the head. A line of waiting people went right through it.
Come on, Gabby, spin this tire. Jim Morrison, the baby blue space worm, sang loudly. He wiggled and gesticulated as he crooned, holding a deep and dulcet note as he finished the lyric. Why do you have to kill this tiger?
Tim, I love this story
Thank
because
you.
you're welcome. One of the things I love about it is that it starts so silly, right? It's
Right.
like, and it's like the camera's really close in on this
Mhm.
this guy singing, and then the camera pulls out a lot. I'm not going to do any spoilers, but you pull the camera out, and this really, it seems really casual, but I think I think it's there's a lot mechanically going on under the surface, and every time the camera comes out, it gets worse and worse, and the story gets super gnarly. This is one of those. There's not a lot of stories that I have to read with my fingers over my eyes, but
Oh.
yours is one. So what I really love about this story is that you've managed to do the horror comedy thing, which I think is almost impossible to do. Is that something like, did you know that was the goal from the beginning? Like, I'm going to get into horror comedy, or did it just get gnarly by accident?
I think when I came up with the concept that I knew it was going to be quote unquote weird. And I think sort of naturally, for better or worse, when I write anything, it usually has at least something in it that makes me crack up when I write it anyway. And it could be sort
Uh-huh.
of like a smaller amount, it could be a larger amount. But I knew when I was writing it and I had like concepts of like someone who was like a worm that was obsessed with 60s counterculture and another worm that was obsessed with like a Downton Abbey or upstairs downstairs type show that was probably going to be weird or at least somewhat funny. At least to me, because comedy is subjective, right? Uh,
No, but I'm the same way. All of my stories,
that's true,
there's
yeah.
all of my stories deep down, like even if they're super bleak, and some of them are bleak, but I'm still joking at the bottom of all of it.
Right.
And a lot of my stories come out of things that are like jokes that you tell with your writing group or your wife or whatever, and then you try to write it like it wasn't silly, and see how it comes out.
Yeah. And so that's really what I was going to. So I went in and this is one of my earlier stories. So I went in thinking that I was just trying to think of things that would make me laugh and sort of like that confusion would sort of like these aliens just sort of like having a job to do, but just being really lazy and sort of slacking off and
Right.
not doing research. And so, yeah, I went into it trying to make it the best that I could humorous. Yeah. You have a story idea, but when it comes to you wanting to be funny, how often is that intentional in your writing?
Um, I'm working on it. I'm working on it really hard.
Mhm.
Um, this story isn't really funny. I think
No,
I've buried it pretty deep on this one. The
at least not surface level, but I think there's quite a bit of humor to be found there, actually.
So this comes from Pompeii and the way that people were frozen, and me imagining people taking the wrong lesson from Pompeii. And so it was a joke with my friends, and then I tried to turn it into a story that got rejected 45 times.
And so it was so you 47 times,
45.
actually.
No, 45 times.
45.
Fuck you, Tim. 47
I added two
times.
more. 40 no.
Do I look like a 47 rejection person?
No, you do not. You don't. You don't.
Thank
You
you.
don't. I don't think you like a 45 rejection person either, but I'm being and your story starts off just sort of great and interesting. Like I like the big, huge, like sort of like Max Headroom-esque head who's like
Hmm.
turning around in the park. Just sort of like pitching this idea, and there are like statues that sort of indicate what's going on or not they
Yeah.
don't that in the later read, but you do so well with sort of like you really tease it out and you pull out very quickly, and like this sort of there's a I think like sort of a poignantness there as well about cherishing moments instead of potentially wasting them or potentially like enjoying what someone has while they have it before it can potentially go bad or it can be a waste.
Tim, do you think this story is inspirational?
I might not look at a photo booth the same way. I
Yeah,
don't know. I'm odd, so maybe in a way, kind of. I mean,
that's really interesting. Sure. I mean, yeah, okay. Don't do it.
I won't do it. I won't do it. But the sort of living in the moment and experiencing the moment for it being a good thing while it's happening, I think that's interesting and the way you do it. But at the same time, focusing on comedy yourself, because obviously there are sort of pieces of comedy there. Do you consider this a sort of piece that hits on that sort of comedy vibe? I can see why it might have literary qualities as well, though. Obviously, I think that's
Meh.
at least I think so. But what do I know about literary? So.
um, what was the question?
So when you think of this piece and just writing in general, and I think Xanax Hamster is a really cool thing for that. I find it very hard to pigeonhole stories. Sometimes I feel like you often have to
Mhm.
sort of sell them. Um, do you feel that this story is one that could be easily pigeonholed?
I think it's easier than I'm writing these days. I think this is it's a
Ah,
dystopian
interesting.
story, and you can say like, here it is, it's dystopian. I'm reminded, by the way, that that old story. It's a hoary story at this point about how Kafka couldn't get through any of his readings because he kept
Hmm.
cracking up too much, and
Hmm.
his stuff doesn't read as funny, but you
Right.
get it. Like there's this bleak joke under it, and this is more along those veins, like a bleak joke. It's not. There are no jokes. Your story has jokes. My story doesn't have jokes.
Right.
I'm working with it more. I think that genre mags have trouble accepting comedy. And I think that may have been the problem with your story because it's good
Yeah.
enough, but it's funny. And I think people get confused.
I do too. Particularly when it comes to because I would love to read more sort of comedy, horror, weird sort of speculative stuff, but I do think people get confused. And I think, and I always wonder because what's funny to you might not be funny to someone else. And so a lot
Almost
of
never.
almost never. But I wonder if it's harder to pull that off in short stories.
I
Um,
think it's hard to pull off in general. I think
yeah.
writing humor is super hard. I think it's one of the hardest things.
The horror. The horror.